Okay guys, so in this video I'm going to be talking to you about the best focus settings when shooting wildlife or birds with the Sony A7RIV mounted with the 200 to 600 millimeter zoom lens, which is the camera and the lens that I've got in front of me here. Now this video is not going to go into technical details on the camera, it's not going to go into the technical details of the lens either. There's a lot of videos on YouTube that talk about this. In this video I'm specifically focusing only on my preferred focus settings. Right guys, so as I said at the start of the video, in this video I'm going to be talking to you about the focus settings when shooting wildlife and birds with the Sony A7RIV in combination with a 200 to 600 millimeter G lens from Sony. Now, in saying that, I want to point out that there's a lot of different options when it comes to this. These are my preferred options that I use. For me, the rule is keep it simple. I want to try and keep it as simple as possible when shooting birds and wildlife, so I don't overcomplicate things. So what you need to do is try and find the best settings for yourself. Now, just quickly to touch on a few other things. I like to shoot in manual mode. It gives me a lot more control. That's the first thing, so I don't ever shoot in auto. And then generally when it comes to aperture, when I'm shooting animals within their environment, then I keep the f-stop number quite high. So I reduce the aperture so that I've got a wider depth of field, and thereby I can capture the animal nicely in its environment. If on the other hand I'm looking to have the animal very, very sharp in the foreground and I want the background to be blurred, in other words I want that nice shallow depth of field, blurry background, bokeh as we refer to it, then what I'm going to do is open up my aperture quite wide, get a lot of light in, and that will focus the lens on the subject and blur the background. So with this lens, you've got the option to go from 5.6 up to 6.3, and generally that's going to be, if I'm at 600 millimeters, then I'm going to be at 6.3 f-stop number. With the shutter speed, obviously I want to keep my shutter speed as high as possible to freeze the animal, whether it's a bird or an animal, particularly fast-moving animals and birds in flight. Obviously you need a very high shutter speed. So generally the rule there is fast enough to freeze the action. But it's a combination of playing around with your aperture and your shutter speed to get the right amount of light into the camera and not to have over or underexposed photographs. But let's jump in and talk about the focus mode specifically. So with the Sony A7RIV, there's a lot of different focus modes available. The three that you're generally going to use most often are either AFS, AFA, and AFC. And the one that I generally always keep it on for wildlife is AFC, which is continuous autofocus. Then when it comes to focus area, again, there's quite a few different options with the Sony A7RIV. The three that I generally focus on are zone, expanded flexible spot, and tracking flexible spot, either small, medium, or large. I'll quickly run you through the pros and cons of each of those focus modes. So first of all, with zone, what's happening there is that the camera is focusing on quite a large area wherever the movement happens to be. So if I'm shooting a bird in flight, or if I'm shooting a subject, a wildlife, an animal, or a bird where there isn't any obstruction behind the bird and it's a clear sky, for example, a bird standing at the top of the tree and I can see the clear sky behind the bird, then I like to use zone, because that's going to capture that bird as he moves around and there's going to be nothing else for the camera to focus on accidentally. Whereas I would use expanded flexible spot, either small, medium, or large. When the bird is in a tree, for example, there's a lot of leaves around and the camera can accidentally focus on one of those leaves or a branch or something like that. I also use it where the animal is standing in among some trees or some grass and I need to focus straight through that area, through the grass, to the animal that's standing a little bit further behind. So I want to have a pin sharp focus area specifically on the subject that I'm looking at. In that case, I'm going to use the flexible spot or expanded flexible spot, either small if the subject is very small, medium, or large for bigger animals. And then what I sometimes do is a third method I use is called tracking. So tracking flexible spot, again, either small, medium, or large. And that I use where the animal is, for example, walking across an open area. Then I focus on the animal and the tracking option allows the focus to continue tracking as the animal moves across the frame. For birds, I don't really use the tracking option too much. It's more for animals that are moving across the frame. For birds, I generally use either zone if there's no obstruction, or expanded flexible spot if the bird is within a tree and there's lots of leaves and branches and things where the focus can jump to one of the leaves or the branches, and then you lose the focus of the subject, which is the bird. Okay guys, so what I want to do now is just to show you a few clips and examples of how I use the focus settings in very low light conditions to still be able to capture those animals by switching over to the manual focus settings. The trouble with the 200 to 600 millimeter lens, and most lenses in fact, is you struggle to get enough light in low light conditions to be able to focus using the autofocus settings. So in these next clips I've used the manual setting. Last night we were really privileged to go through to the Alali waterhole, which is about a 500 meter walk from where I am now, and we were able to see black rhino, white rhino, and also a leopard, and also a spotted hyena coming down to the water to drink. Absolutely beautiful seeing those animals in the natural environment. But because the conditions were very dark, it was 9 o'clock in the evening, I needed to use the manual focus ring. The other thing is with the black rhino, because he moves really slowly, what I do is I wait for the black rhino to stop moving, and then I turn my shutter speed way down to about 1/20th of a second so that I can get as much light into the camera as possible. And I pair that with the manual focus setting, where I turn the manual focus ring on the 200 to 600 millimeter zoom lens to then get a sharp image even though it's taken at night. So have a look at these next clips to see how that is done. Okay guys, so what I'm going to do now is show you how to set the focus using the manual focus ring. So the first thing you need to do is set the focus mode to manual focus over there on your lens. At the moment I'm at 400 millimeters, and now we need to turn the focus ring on the lens, and you see what it does. It gives us a zoomed in image on our screen of our subject, and we turn the ring until we get that subject super sharp. So it's given us a zoomed in image of the eye, and we're just going to turn that until we get a nice sharp image. There we go. And I can slightly depress the shutter button again, and there we go. Now we know that image is in focus at 400 millimeters, and I can take that image, and I know it's going to be tack sharp. So that's it guys, those are my focus settings in a nutshell to get pin sharp, razor sharp images of birds. Directly after this now I'm going to run you through a couple of examples of birds and animals that have been shot using these focus settings, and I'll also, as I put up those photographs, just note at the bottom what those focus settings are. That's it, nice and easy. I like to keep it simple guys, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Take care.